It's my nerd world. Yes, that's right. Welcome to it. I am your host, Jon Justice, for another My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast, listener feedback show. This one for the week of March 6th. Boy, time is just flying by. You've written me a lot of emails to TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. You've left a lot of comments on YouTube, and I am going to answer all of them. So, what do you say we not waste any more time, and let's hear what you had to say about that galaxy far, far away this week.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
It is My Nerd World, and I'm really glad you're with the show this week. Again, I am your host, Jon Justice, as we work through your listener feedback. Really, really thankful you guys check out the show each and every week. Got a big show on tap, main show this weekend coming up, and we'll be focusing on some more of the Rise of Skywalker novelization details. More information has been coming out, specifically with a lot of those sort of ambiguous items from the Rise of Skywalker that we're getting further answers to in the novelization, which has me really excited. I really like what I've read so far. I want to say something up front as we work into your listener feedback this week, and I really do think, and I can't wait until we get way further down the line, when we get way past the sequel trilogy, right? And maybe there's a little bit more objectivity given to the sequel trilogy once we get some distance on it. I think there's a lot of overall opinions that have been tainted because of specific choices and that were made in the film, obviously, right? Especially with the end of The Rise of Skywalker. But at the same time, I think that the sequel trilogy as a whole isn't necessarily getting a very good shake when it comes to the criticism and the overall evaluation of the three movies. What I'm trying to drive at is, in the absence of that thing that I talk about so often, sort of pop culture, the zeitgeist of the pop culture, the social networking world that we live in right now, I think that the sequel trilogy deserves a lot more credit for what it was able to do in dovetailing off of what George Lucas originally created. There's a bias here from me. So I want to say that up front and be clear, because I tend to want to be honest and open when it comes to my commentary. But there's a bias here. As somebody who has decided at this portion in my life over the course of the past 5 years to start writing my own stories, I am increasingly more appreciative of what George Lucas has created, and probably more specifically what the individuals who are carrying on with the creation of that content are trying to do, specifically when it comes to the movies. What George Lucas created with Star Wars was brilliant, in my opinion. He took those mythologies that are embedded in us, have been with us throughout human history. He added the technology to it, something that kind of comes off like it's the future, but it's not, because this is supposed to be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Added in this fantasy element, and just the combination of these things that Star Wars brings together, and why it's so popular. It's because it does it better than anybody else does. And again, somebody who, being me, who's now writing these space opera stories, I'm just so appreciative of what George Lucas originally did and what the individuals have done since then. I personally believe that what J.J. created, along with the other individuals at Lucasfilm and Disney, when it comes to the sequel trilogy, in creating a different story that still is very familiar to the original stories, based around these two dual protagonists, was sheer genius. You know, I sit down and I'm working on these stories. I'm in the middle of writing book 4, which is a spin-off tale of the opening trilogy of my series. Book 5 is the next saga book. I've already got that somewhat started, and I'm constantly sort of examining Star Wars and what George Lucas did and the things that he put in Star Wars, and trying to figure out, are there ways to honor what George Lucas did, bring in elements to my story that excite the way that the elements of Star Wars excite, without going and copying what George has done and did in his original creation of Star Wars. And guess what? It's really, really hard to do. Because what George did was so unique and so special. Specifically, and then we're going to get your listener feedback, specifically, lightsabers, man. Lightsabers are the coolest weapon that has ever been created in the history of science fiction creation. They're just so rad. And I have looked 3 ways to Sunday. I think that's the phrase. If it's not, I don't care. I have looked and thought about this so often. It's like, how do you come up with a weapon that is as cool as a lightsaber? And you just can't. Anything close is just derivative or a copy. Like, I've got like plasma and photon guns in my story, and I created this one weapon that I really like. It's if you've seen the Dark Knight Rises, when Batman finally gets back into business, right, in the movie, and he is he's chasing Bane's henchmen out of Wall Street, right, when they were dealing with the stock market. And he's got this weapon that's essentially like an ion gun, right? But it's got this long, thin barrel on it. So I basically took that and I turned it into a plasma weapon that shoots like sheets of plasma. Like, that's the closest I could get. I just thought that was a rad concept. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. You know, I know this is listener feedback this week, but I really do think the sequel trilogy is going to get a much better shake years down the line. And I've mentioned it before, and I'm going to talk about it on the show this week. I love The Rise of Skywalker. As a matter of fact, right now, I think I like it more than The Last Jedi. I really, really do. It is quite possibly one of my favorite Star Wars movies for what it was able to do. All right, so a lot of this is what I'm doing is supposed to be for the main show this weekend, but I just needed to get that off my chest. Get the Star Wars juices flowing in my brain.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Yeah, you do. All right. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. You can also leave a comment on YouTube. Many of you have done that. Let's get into it. We'll start off with Olga. Olga says this: Rey being a Palpatine works for me more than Rey being Luke's child or Kenobi's grandchild. It works perfectly for me. I still can't stand the end of The Rise of Skywalker, by the way. Bob Iger is to blame for wrong decisions, not Kathleen Kennedy, in my opinion. All right. I'm not going to address the second part of it. We've gone over that ground before. But I'm with you on that. I think that Rey being a Palpatine is pretty awesome. And I really think it ties the trilogy together. Again, stepping back from preconceived notions and ideas and headcanon, I think it was a very brilliant move. And that moment in The Rise of Skywalker when actually the duel moments, when they're force fighting, right? Which I love. And those scenes from Kijimi and the Star Destroyer are just so incredible. But when Kylo Ren forces Rey to look into her past to see her parents, and and he says, and they're in the standoff, the lightsaber standoff again. He's like, "You want to know who your parents are? I'll come tell you." Like, he's like, "Nah, man, I'm going to get in my ship. I want to fly up there and get face to face with you, woman, and let you know who you are." That moment's awesome. And then we get that just amazing exchange between the two of them inside that hangar of the Star Destroyer. There's one shot, and I don't know if I've talked about it before, but there's one shot in that scene. So Kylo Ren tells Rey that she's a Palpatine. He takes his helmet off, right? She's standing there at the edge right in front of the force field. And the Millennium Falcon comes up. Poe Dameron hits the afterburner and blows all the First Order troopers back. Kylo Ren braces himself. There's one, and it was in the trailer, right before Rey leaps onto the walk ramp on the Millennium Falcon off of the Star Destroyer. There's a faraway shot of her standing there while the Falcon's got the afterburner going, right? And she's kind of cocked sideways from the rear. Her outfit's blowing in behind her, and she's got this pose. It is such a rad shot. I'm like, I want a poster of that. I just love that image. It's just, to me, it's so powerful. In that moment of Rey, she looks over the edge like, how far down is it to the ground here? I want to get out of here. And then the Falcon shows up, and I love that shot. I loved it from the trailer, and just seeing it in the film is just fantastic. All right, let's get back to your email. And thank you, Olga. I appreciate it. NFL1 says this: "Remember when we first saw Rey? Where was she? She was inside a crashed Star Destroyer. Is it possible that her lineage was being hinted at from the first film of the sequel trilogy? The reason I ask is that Daisy Ridley seemed genuinely confused by the speculation of the fandom at the time, the majority of which believed her to be a Skywalker. That scene in The Force Awakens has a new sense of relevance beyond being a series of cool shots. I don't think I'm the only person who clocked this." No, you're not. And I don't know if it still has been concretely determined whether or not she was a Palpatine from the get-go, but I will say that it works that she was a Palpatine from the get-go. And I may talk about this a bit on the main show. The only thing that's a little bit wonky, and I need to go back and watch The Force Awakens again because it's been a little while since I've watched it in relation to the times that I've watched The Rise of Skywalker. But I want to go and examine those exchanges that we all speculated on for when The Force Awakens first came out, specifically when they're arriving on Takodana and Rey makes the comment of seeing all the green on the planet, and Han looks at her, the exchange between Han and Maz Kanata, who's the girl, and then towards the end of the film with Leia talking about Rey but seemingly not caring all that much what's happening with her. I want to see how, to what NFL said, I want to see how that clocks in retrospect to The Rise of Skywalker. Back into their comment, they had more to say. "The Rise of Skywalker is my favorite Star Wars film. I know that it has received a lot of flack from fans, but the sequel trilogy is my favorite trilogy. Yep, I said it. I'm a diehard original trilogy fan, so am I. But these new films did things that LG didn't, right? My favorite character is Kylo Ren and Ben Solo. The scene in The Rise of Skywalker where he is confronted by the memory of Han is my favorite scene in the whole of Star Wars. I well up thinking about it. I loved Rian Johnson's take on Luke. I actually found him relatable. Yep, I did too, especially as I'm in the latter years of my life. There's a video on YouTube in which someone who hated The Last Jedi does a 180 and says he loves the film now. He pointed out that Rian Johnson and Mark Hamill masterfully made Luke unrecognizable to Rey, who has heard about, who's only heard the legends about him. And to us, it was challenging, and I loved it. The Rise of Skywalker had all the elements of Star Wars that I appreciate, and had a sense of action serials that inspired it. People forget that part and talk ad nauseum about the hero's journey. While that is an important element of the story, never forget this was George Lucas's starting point. Anyway, keep up the good work and stay positive. Yeah, look, I love all three of these films. And, I say at the moment The Rise of Skywalker is my favorite one. And I don't like to rate these this changes. It doesn't mean that I like Rian Johnson's film any less. I just feel so blessed that we have these three amazing films. You know, The Force Awakens is the setup. And The Force Awakens, to me, is an anomaly. It totally works in the context of these three movies. It does what it absolutely needs to do in establishing these characters and making sure that we're ready to go on this further journey with them. In retrospect, I actually think that it was really genius of Rian Johnson to do what he did in starting The Last Jedi right after The Force Awakens, because it kind of makes this much longer. It almost makes it like a two-part series instead of a three-part series. Because to me, Rian Johnson picks up the mantle of the establishment of The Force Awakens for as derivative as it was of the original trilogy while introducing these characters, and then immediately thrusts something brand new on us, completely changes our perspective and perception of what we were going to get. And they're very different films. I mean, watching The Last Jedi next to The Rise of Skywalker, I will say this, it is a little jarring just because they are two very, very different films, but I just love it about that. I really, really do. And I'm going to watch both of those movies more than The Force Awakens, but more specifically, I'm going to watch both of those movies really depending on what I want, right? You know, in that moment of wanting to watch Star Wars, what kind of mood am I in? You know, do I want to kind of get into it and let the movie wash over me and really just sort of absorb it? That's The Last Jedi. Do I want to sit down and just have a great time for 2.5 hours? That's The Rise of Skywalker. Friend of the show, Shlomo, said this: heard Claire's email on the listener feedback show. Let her know it was fantastic. Shlomo. Yeah, Claire was the email that we addressed at the end of the show last week. We just made some amazing points about the end of The Rise of Skywalker and the symbolism of Rey with Leia and Luke's lightsabers. And it was just some really great points. Be sure to check out last week's listener feedback show if you missed it. Disney, Lucasfilm, released a whole bunch of clips from The Rise of Skywalker this week, which just has me clamoring to go and see the movie again. As a matter of fact, I actually checked the movie listings because I was going to maybe go see it again this weekend. I had decided that I'd seen it enough in the theater, I think 15 times, right? But I was like, man, I really want to go see it again, so maybe I'll check it out. And I'm bummed because my local theater, like the last showing that they did of the movie was Wednesday. So now that the weekend's here, they're not showing it anymore. But it'll be out on digital here in less than 2 weeks. So Shock Fitness says this: not liking The Rise of Skywalker doesn't mean you're a malcontent that just wants to bash Star Wars. It merely means you have an objective opinion. Sure. I'm grateful we got these 3 last Star Wars films, but I didn't find The Rise of Skywalker as a well-executed film. Not hating on it, just didn't care for it. Love the show. Keep up the good work. You know, I agree, Shock Fitness. Not everybody's like that, though, right? I mean, there was somebody on Twitter yesterday, I think AT Chat was commenting on him, and basically throwing out these absolutes like, if you still think that these sequel trilogy films are good, then you must have a mental disorder. I do not understand. Twitter is such a cesspool, I swear. It's a place where a lot of good can happen, but oh my gosh, there's so much bad that can happen on it. All right, the Color of Carmel wrote a really lengthy email. I basically did some editing on this, so I cut it a little bit out of what the Color of Carmel said. But there's some interesting points in here I wanted to share. They first apologized for the long comment, but this is what the Color of Carmel had to break down. 1, it's funny how this newer generation thinks the original trilogy has no flaws, and they weren't around when The Return of Jedi came out. It was considered the weaker of the original trilogy, and it was. By the time The Return of the Jedi came out, it felt like it was running out of steam. There is an old article, and this was I think it was maybe the 90s, might have been around when the prequel trilogy got released, but I remember sort of still pre-Twitter, somebody had written this very lengthy piece basically saying how Return of the Jedi was a rehash of A New Hope, and it broke down like sort of scene by scene why there wasn't anything new in Return of the Jedi. And I think that was by design. I think when George Lucas did Return of the Jedi, he really wanted to sort of bookend the trilogy. But it's funny to me because like that was one article that a couple of people saw. But if that gets written today about any of the sequel trilogy films, it just gets spread all over the galaxy. All right, back to Color of Carmel. John, you need to watch The Last Jedi and The Return of the Jedi together. The similarities between the two baffles the mind. The reason for the back and forth, as you call it, it is something some of us have been saying, the rise of social media and the opinions that come with it. I agree with Gen G. I needed more Knights of Ren in The Rise of Skywalker. We all wanted to see them after TFA, which is why most of us wished JJ would have done the whole trilogy himself, because by the time we do get to The Rise of Skywalker, their potential was wasted. Their screen time totaled like 12 minutes. Yeah, look, even I, when watching The Rise of Skywalker and you see the Knights of Ren, I just kind of go, okay, they're there. They look cool. They pose cool. They have a good moment. Actually, no, they have a great moment with Kylo Ren at the end of the film. Sorry, with Ben Solo by that point in time at the end of the film. If you were asking me, do you want to see more Knights of Ren? Yeah, maybe. Not at the expense of the rest of the story, though, and that's kind of where my head goes, right? I like what Rian Johnson did, and I think it makes way more sense that Snoke would have his own band of guards and not the Knights of Ren. And for those that don't know, Rian Johnson was very specific in saying that he created the Praetorian Guards because he didn't want to do the Knights of Ren and get rid of them. And to me, that works from a story standpoint, a narrative standpoint, because Snoke was somebody sort of apart, right, from Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren. So that makes sense. So when you get to The Rise of Skywalker, they're in there, they're used. Would I like to have seen them more? Yeah, but where do you fit them in and what do you make them do other than what they did? And here's what's really funny to me. Just as an observation, we'll get back to the color of Caramel's comments. But what's really funny to me is how, when it comes to the Knights of Ren, the difference between the original trilogy then and the and the sequel trilogy now and how we look at these films, look at Boba Fett. Boba Fett became one of the most popular Star Wars characters ever. And I was thinking about this yesterday because I love Zori Bliss, and I was laughing about this point with regard to Zori Bliss. But Boba Fett was barely in those movies, right? He didn't really show up extensively or more extensively until the special editions, when he was included in the original in A New Hope, right? You don't get him for but a few shots in The Empire Strikes Back. Okay, you get him a little bit on Cloud City. You get him following the Millennium Falcon prior to that, and then he goes out like a punk in Return of the Jedi. And yet he became this massively famous character because of the way he looked. So I look at that, and I don't begrudge JJ for not using the Knights of Ren more, because it's just kind of a Star Wars thing. But then again, I find ways to enjoy my Star Wars. So, all right. After Ben Solo did that awesome defeat of the Knights of Ren and joined Rey to stand against Palpatine, what did we get? We got Ben Solo tossed to the side in favor of Rey being the one to save the day, a character that a lot of people still felt undecided about because in the second movie, nothing was done or said to give any type of connection to her. Now some of the hardcore fans are being unfair about Rey, but I see where they are coming from. And again, this is subjective, and this is where I completely disagree. I think that the Ben Solo angle of it is really just a matter of perception. Ben Solo ended up giving Rey back to the galaxy. If it hadn't been for his sacrifice there at the end of the film after being tossed down into the pit and then climbing back out and then resurrecting Rey, the galaxy didn't have that other spark of hope in Rey being now the last Jedi. So I still think that's relevant. And in terms of Rey in the Last Jedi, I absolutely felt a connection to her. She was looking for something. I need someone to show me my place in all of this. She was faced with these difficult challenges and suddenly found an alliance and a relatability in the last person that she would expect to go and find it in, and that was Kylo Ren. So, and again, it's just a matter of perspective, and it's very subjective. All right, getting back to Color of Caramel. When Rey was introduced in The Force Awakens, she had potential, but as this trilogy went on, you have to ask, was Rey meant to be a hero, or was she simply to be the catalyst that would help end the bigger threat? Whether or not that's true, Ben Solo should have been the one to confront and end Palpatine. He healed Rey with the help of the other Force ghosts and live on Tatooine anonymously apart to start his redemption by helping others scarred by the First Order. Again, it's all subjective, and whatever your opinion is. I disagree. I think that Rey was ultimately the hero of this sequel trilogy for a myriad of reasons that I won't get into right now because I want to get through more of your email. Redemption does not mean death. Not always. I don't consider that fan service at all, especially knowing that Ben Solo was originally supposed to live, but it was changed at the last minute for him to die, which was stupid. Let me stop here. Did we ever get confirmation of that? From what we were told, there was no different endings. This was the ending that was planned all along. So, no offense, I think that's pure speculation and rumor at this point in time, largely perpetuated by people that didn't like the end of the film, which is understandable. But I don't think we ever got any confirmation whatsoever that Ben was supposed to live. Okay. They go on to say, and then Kennedy and company or whomever decided that Rey should adopt the last name of Skywalker. That was a big what? Even my father, who doesn't socialize on any social media, was like, why did they kill him if he's a Skywalker, shouldn't he have lived? I didn't answer for him, but I told him this is what has divided the fans further. Questionable decisions that really don't make sense if you think about it. Anyway, didn't mean to write so much, but it really gets me when some hardcore fans don't see why some of us feel Ben Solo shouldn't have died. It's the same place the Reylos are coming from. That has nothing to do with romance and more of how well Adam Driver played and his acting made you want to see Ben Solo succeed. Okay, I'm done. Again, I appreciate all your comments, but from my perspective on that whole thing, it is completely subjective because I disagree. One, like I said, I don't know whether or not that was actually the case that he was going to live. And two, I completely understand the decision for Ben Solo to sacrifice and transform into the Force based off of the actions that he'd done prior to that as Kylo Ren, which he still has to be held accountable for. All right. Brian Martin, friend of the show, has a lot of questions. I'm going to try to work through them quickly. At the end of The Rise of Skywalker, isn't the state of the galaxy in the same position after it was after Return of the Jedi? The Empire defeated, no Republic, only one Jedi left in the galaxy. Yeah, it is. I'm not sure what the question is there, but no, it is. I mean, then that's kind of what Star Wars is always going to do. It's kind of like real life. You know, we go through cycles here in America, and there's difficult times, and then things calm down, and then things get hard again. It's just how things go. And when it comes to Star Wars, there's just going to be the balance is always key. There's always going to be a battle to keep balance. When it comes to exactly how Palpatine returned, and with him being a clone as explained in the novel, I told some people what you said, that the Star Wars movie novelizations always had certain details that weren't in the movies, and that the movie explained just enough with Palpatine's line, the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. And here's some of the responses that I got. No, this is a major part of the story that they left out. Stop making excuses for Lucasfilm's blatant incompetence. Stop it, please. Details are one thing. Major events and information that are important to the plot is a crappy move. And this is coming from someone that read/played nearly every old EU novel and comics and game. Repeating a line from an older movie for nostalgia's sake doesn't count as an explanation. How would you respond to each of them? I would respond to each of them by saying this is all subjective. You're entitled to your opinion, but I disagree. I mean, it really is that. It really is that easy, and I hate to be sort of so cavalier about it, but it is. It's just people. Everyone's got different opinions on this stuff, and you accept it for what it is, and you don't. I could go through and break it down in the original trilogy, all the different times when this exact same thing happened, or when even in the prequel trilogy, the same thing. The novels always gave more details and explanations to things that weren't completely explained in the film. You know, we used to be fine with that until we were able to voice every single complaint at a moment's notice on Twitter and respond to everybody within a nanosecond when they go and give an opinion that they don't like out on social media. What is your opinion of Rose Tico's character? What do you think of her? I liked Rose Tico a lot in The Last Jedi, and I'm totally fine with what they did with her in The Rise of Skywalker. I thought, she was... Rian Johnson came out in an interview. They were using this as clickbait. Somebody put up an article saying Rian Johnson didn't follow canon, didn't care about Star Wars canon, and he admitted such. No, he didn't admit such. In a recent interview talking about Knives Out, he was asked about Star Wars and said that he wanted to create a singular movie. and that he wanted to create a movie that fit within the sequel trilogy, but ultimately could go and stand on its own. And that's the same thing that JJ has done as well. So, he brought in this Rose Tico character because he wanted this character in the film to be a partner with Finn. I think that the Finn and Rose dynamic in The Last Jedi doesn't get a fair shake. I understand why people don't like it, but I like it. I do not agree with the argument that Finn doesn't have a role in The Last Jedi. He's got his own subplot, for crying out loud. But I thought her character was great. And these films, and looking at these films and stories through the lens of these are historical documents, this is just what happened. This happens in real life. You meet people, they get involved in your life, they have a part of your life, and sometimes they stick around, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they take on a larger role, sometimes they don't. And to me, that carried over well. If we're looking at a year after The Last Jedi with The Rise of Skywalker and Rose Tico has a different role, okay. Again, when it comes to the Rise of Skywalker, you're not asking this, but I'll apply the Knights of Ren logic. Okay, for those that complained and pitched a fit because Rose Tico didn't get nearly as much screen time in The Last Jedi that she did in The Rise of Skywalker, if we were to try to fit in all these wants and desires by certain minority sections of the fandom, The Rise of Skywalker would have been a 6-hour movie. There's just not enough time. I thought what J.J. Abrams did with her character was awesome and really made a lot of sense in the way that he handled it and made her important in the film, but ended up having to focus on the things that were really driving the story forward. All right. JJ writes this. Just finished listening to your podcast. You don't even have to tell me you aren't too excited about the High Republic stuff. Either I have listened to your podcast for so long, or it's in your voice. But I can tell you before you even get into the subject matter whether you like it or not. Yep. That goes back to my talent coaching. Right? That's exactly why you talk about the things that you genuinely want to talk about, and you don't cover things that you're not that interested in, because if you're not that interested in it and you're just talking about it for the sake of talking about it, it's going to end up showing. So yeah, I'm really not that excited for the High Republic stuff. None of it really grabbed me all that much. I'll see what it is they're going to produce, but yeah, sitting with it more, I'm just kind of meh. All right, we'll see how it is. Let's see. Getting back into their email. With the Star Wars film saga, you have an excited undertone in your voice. With, say, the High Republic stuff, your tone was more flat when referencing it, so I knew you were going to be wait and see, but I can tell you're not excited about it. My personal thoughts are Disney sounds like they're trying to check all these boxes that are important issues in today's society and work with the story around that instead of telling the story first and including these things. Totally agree. I also think that they're playing it safe by putting books out there first to see if it's a hit. Totally agree. Then they can make movies out of it and say, well, they liked the story from the books. Good chances they will like the film. I just feel that in some way, all the negativity is affecting them on some level. Maybe. I think a lot of it, that could be the case. I think also there's just a way that content is being created right now that maybe isn't the best way for content to be created right now. I don't know. I feel like there still needs to be some guiding main individual at the center of Lucasfilm to guide the ship and make all the decisions. I still feel like Disney and Lucasfilm need that person. They need somebody there that can really go and be the ultimate voice of... They need a Palpatine, right? They need a dictator. They need a George Lucas. All right. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm reading too much into it. I don't think so. And once again, as you pointed out from the comments I made last time, we don't really know what is going on. We just react to what is said and written on social media. I think they picked the High Republic era because they want to go with something that's not with not a lot of canon preconceived notions of how it should be. Yep, totally agree. I will say I'm interested in the High Republic. I loved a lot of Star Wars books. I honestly just want to read Star Wars content and not have all this behind-the-scenes stuff so I can just enjoy it. I don't want today's politics in my Star Wars. It ruins it for me, and it will turn me off. Totally agree. Got to admit, Star Wars does often mirror society. George Lucas did that. A lot of his story and plot points were very much derived from real-world conflicts that we dealt with and real-world situations, but it's done in a subtle way, right? It's not done to hit you over the head, and that's what concerns me now is rather than it being, hey, we're going to make the Ewoks be like the Viet Cong, right? Stormtroopers are going to be sort of indicative of Nazis, this kind of thing, and so are the Imperials. That's just a very, there's some similarities there. I get fearful when they're trying to do something that connects on a much, much deeper level. All right. Back to The Rise of Skywalker. I didn't care for the end. I do appreciate listener comments about how she thought Rey burying the lightsabers, back to Claire's comment, were about the coupling of Reylo. But for someone who needs more definitive scenes of Reylo or doesn't dig into the symbolism, they don't see that. I could have embraced Ben's death better if they had given him a bit more time between Reylo before he dies, which I've stated before. I did feel the ending was rushed, and from the book, if they would have included Rey's tearing up, standing over his tunic/sweater, or Ben's statement, I would have been fine. I always go back to the gang in the quicksand and being in that cave. I understand the point was to show how Rey could heal things and to understand their pain, but I could live if they cut all that out and gave more time with Reylo. Okay. But that's just me, and they don't cater to me. As you say, we got what we got, right? And LOL with you and your spacecraft love. That's right. We all like what we like. I honestly can't wait to watch it again and again. I've already pre-ordered the book just to see the expansion on things, and from what I read, it sounds encouraging. Great podcast. Thanks. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Always appreciate your comments. All right. Let's see. Miranda Alice says this. Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley's portrayal of Ben Solo and Rey and their dynamic in the sequel trilogy, if I haven't said it already, but I'll continue to say it forever and ever, has been the highlight of the sequel trilogy for me. And as the variety of different conversations continue on a day, one thing is definitely certain. We are all just guaranteeing that no one will ever forget them and how undeniably special they were and will be, and forever will be, and hold a dear place in my heart. And if you don't mind me saying this, they should, if they haven't already, share a spot with every other epic, iconic couple in film, especially Gone with the Wind, West Side Story, Pride and Prejudice, now with the High Republic. Pride and Prejudice. Now with the High Republic, if you don't mind me saying, but the cover and some of the concept art kind of gives off a retro look to them. Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And again, I'm not going to I've already sort of tread my ground over my thoughts about the High Republic situation. And they're books, right? And I'm not even though I'm now an author, I'm not the biggest book reader in Star Wars either. So again, I am more than willing to wait to see how all of that shakes out. Next, we go to friend of the show, Bonnie, writes this. I wanted to chime in on the novelization excerpt concerning The Big Kiss. I think there are a whole lot of people that will be, parentheses, have been, made mad all over again about the kiss being described as a kiss of gratitude. I'd see it differently, of course. So if you missed this last week, in the excerpt from the novel, as Bonnie mentioned, when we get to the scene at the end of The Rise of Skywalker and the kiss, the way it's described is a part of it is a kiss of gratitude. That's the way that's partly described. Let me get into what Bonnie says here, and then I'll add my thoughts. The whole line is, here we go, a kiss of gratitude, acknowledgement of their connection, celebration that they'd found each other at last. Insert a kiss of in front of things like following gratitude, a kiss of acknowledgement of their connection, a kiss of celebration that they'd found each other at last. It wasn't just a kiss of gratitude. Right. The rest of it still sounds pretty romantic to me. No, absolutely. Look, the way that it was directed and shot was, look, as a hopeless romantic, that scene and seeing, it's one of my favorite moments of all of Star Wars. And again, this is coming from a standpoint of being, again, that hopeless romantic. But that moment to me as a male was incredibly moving and meaningful and emotional. The look on Rey, the beaming glow and smile, the beautiful smile on Rey's face, acknowledging that she's seeing Ben. And then you can just, the way that she pulls him in, places her hands on the side of his face, and her shoulders, kind of lean in, like she's leaning in. I thought it was incredibly romantic, if not one of the most. I find that more romantic than the finger touch and loving scene, and I really enjoy that too. But it's certainly more romantic than any other scene in Star Wars, in my opinion, including the Han and Leia kiss and including Anakin and Padme. All right, so Bonnie goes on to say, I think this is a versatile line. If you want it to be romantic, it is. If you want it to be platonic, it is. It's all the things. It's a nice way you look at it, says Bonnie. Yeah, and I totally agree. And again, it's one of those, the journey in this movie, starting with, and using the jump-off point of The Last Jedi, the journey that Rey and Kylo go on works so well in The Rise of Skywalker. One of the first interactions they have, he still has the mask on. And yet she doesn't even then outrightly reject him, right? I offered you my hand once. I'm trying to get this right. I offered you my hand once. Why didn't you take it? You could have killed me. Why didn't you? And he says, I'm going to offer it to you again. You're going to turn to the dark side. She just says, we'll see. She doesn't dismiss it outright. And then as the movie progresses, he removes the helmet. When he sees her, he doesn't have the helmet on Pisana after that exchange. Or actually, that would have been before, right? That was before that exchange. So that's my apologies on that. My timing's off. Either way, the helmet ends up coming back off again later when she ends up confronting him again on the Death Star 2. And I just love the progression there that leads to her healing him after Leia reaches out to Ben. I did want to take your hand, Ben's hand, right? And to me, that's when I kind of go, yeah, man, game on. How's this thing going to play out? And it plays out with that amazing kiss. And thank you, Bonnie. I really do appreciate it. All right. J-O-B. J-O''B says this. John, can you do a video on your character, vehicle, and story creating process for your EMBARK series? I'm really glad you asked that. And I know this is not Star Wars related, but I'll just touch upon it for a moment. I've really been kicking around this idea of doing a self-publishing podcast. As a matter of fact, I have everything in place and ready to go when it comes to the third book in my science fiction space opera series, The Vanishing War. I haven't started recording the audiobook yet. I'm going to be doing that soon. And I was planning on actually sharing with you the recording of the audiobook process and actually doing a podcast where I would actually put on the podcast my recording of it, like you would be able to hear the actual book. I haven't decided if I'm going to do that yet, and I've been getting some requests from other people too, and I've talked about this idea of doing a self-publishing podcast, but I just haven't quite determined what I wanted it to be yet. I don't know, how much of a crossover audience there's going to be between the Star Wars podcast and the self-publishing podcast. If I do one, I can absolutely go and do that, J-O-B. I would love to do that when it comes to my character, vehicle, and story creating process. But if I do, I think I'm going to lean towards sort of being the novice self-publisher working on my third book and the process that I've gone through while I still kind of figure it out, because I haven't figured it out yet. I'm still sort of operating at barely a profit because of the amount of advertising that I'm doing. I'm making a little bit of money, but not a lot by any stretch yet. I'm really waiting to get this third book out to see how the sales go, because I think a lot of people are waiting to purchase the entire series until the third book is out. I was like, I hope you don't, but that's my intention. But I want to add though, J-O-B, if you are so inclined, or anybody else, if I do a self-publishing podcast and I talk about the creative process, I'd love to know exactly what it is you'd like to hear. As J.O.B. asked, a character, vehicle, and story creating process for EMBARK, I would encourage you, please leave another comment or email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, with any questions that you have about the creative process or self-publishing itself. And when and if I decide to do a show like that, I can go and answer those questions. So, again, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. All right, one more email. It comes from a friend of the show, of the Star Wars podcast. But they are talking about my book, and I definitely wanted to share it with you. So Severin, again, friend of the show, wrote me this, and it really made my day. And made me it really is a big incentive for me to continue writing my stories, because nothing excites me more than when somebody reads my book and they actually are grabbing on to exactly what I had intended to do in the book, and that's amazing. So I wanted to share this with you and consider this the promotional plug for my science fiction book series, EMBARK. And if you want to support the podcast, that's how you can go about doing it. So Severin writes this. My husband gave me both EMBARK books for my birthday on Sunday, and I started reading the first book almost immediately. I have 3 thoughts. Number 1, all capital letters, Severin writes this, I love this story. Makes my heart sore. 2, I don't know why, but one of the characters in the book, Ashley, I get the feeling Ashley likes Daft Punk more than any other nostalgia band from the 90s and 2000s. And within my story, I wanted to make the stories in the future so that I could have some fun with the science and do kind of a fantasy science, right? Kind of jump ahead and create some things that don't exist now but could potentially in the future. So that's why I did that. But I also wanted the story to be grounded in a sense of reality that you can relate to. It's one of the things that George Lucas just did so well. As a matter of fact, I was listening to a self-publishing podcast before I sat back down to record this podcast, and in it, they were interviewing another science fiction writer, and the interviewer had mentioned how, as a kid, when George Lucas made Star Wars and made the vehicles that needed to be, you had to tap on the control panel or bang against it to get it to work, and everything was dingy. It was a lived-in universe. How relatable that was. It wasn't all shiny, new, and clean. And I've absolutely done that with EMBARK. That was my intention all along, was to ground it in a sense of reality that even though we're in the future, you could still relate to it on a regular, everyday basis. And a part of that was also including pop culture references from today. So I included a plot point in the book where the younger generation in the future listens back to the era of music that I grew up in, right? It's a nostalgia thing for them. They call it the Grand Rock Age. It's a nostalgia thing for them. And it's the same thing with movies as well. So I embedded this in the story set in the future in order for me to be able to put in Easter eggs and play with the stuff that I grew up on and was inspired by. Severin goes on to say, I thought I'd let you know about one of my characters, Ashley, being a Daft Punk fan. That's my personal headcanon for him so far. I haven't gotten to any point of the book where you state the group or band he does like the most. Also, I've always been a David Bowie junkie, but I'm pretty sure this book is going to turn me into a Depeche Mode fan too, and I'm okay with that. The main character, Taft, is a massive Depeche Mode fan, because I'm a massive Depeche Mode fan. And then number 3, and this one goes to you guys listening. To anyone who hasn't tried these books yet, if you like a good slow burn, doing that thing with my fingers, romance, I recommend EMBARK Book 1. So far, there's a very intriguing dynamic between the 2 main protagonists, and if you need to start a new obsession over a couple that isn't Reylo, you really should get on the Taftha ship. So Taft and Katha are my 2 dual protagonists in my story. Obviously, I haven't finished the story yet, but at this rate, I'm going to have it read by the end of the week for a reason, which is a part of the story. Severin writes. Also, she says, can't wait to read this whole trilogy. I really hope you write more. I am. I already don't want to say goodbye to these characters, and I haven't even finished the first book, Severin. Thank you so much. And you can go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK and Jon, Jon Justice, and you'll find my books there. Again, book 1, it's the one she's referring to, is already available. Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, is also available. Both books are in audiobook, paperback, and ebook. Right now, The Vanishing War is being edited, and that edit will be done by the end of March. As a matter of fact, I've actually put together, and I will share this with you guys for the first time. So you'll be the first ones to know this. So I've actually put together a bit of a release schedule if it stays on track. So my hope is, and what I'm working on, is for EMBARK The Vanishing War Book 3, which will close out the trilogy, but not the stories in and of themselves. It's just the end of this trilogy. wrapping up this particular story. So EMBARK, The Vanishing War, Book 3, is tentatively scheduled to be released on April 24th, and then the audiobook will be following shortly after, sometime in mid-March. The fourth book in the series, I'm about halfway done with writing, in the middle of the editing process for The Vanishing War. The fourth book in the series is going to be a standalone story based on characters from The Vanishing War. It will tie into The Vanishing War, but can be read on its own. It is essentially just like Solo or Rogue One, probably more akin to something like Rogue One. It's going to be its own story, written in first person. I don't want to give the characters yet because it's relevant to The Vanishing War, and I don't want to give anything away. But book number 4 will be, I haven't landed on a title yet, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't want to give anything away, but it's going to be blah, 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 an EMBARK adventure. And so that book 4 will again be the interim in between the next series of saga books. Book 5 will be the start of a brand new saga. Another most likely trilogy along the same lines as book 1, 2, and 3. And then possibly more standalone stories coming on later on down the line. I'll be completely upfront. I am totally ripping off what Marvel has done and what Star Wars and Lucasfilm attempted to do. And that is, I want major saga stories and arcs on a grand scale. Those stories are done in third-person omniscient views because they're big stories with a lot of characters and grand in scope. And then I am going to continue writing these shorter and smaller, more personal spin-off stories within the universe. And what's really, really fun about this, and certainly with this book 4 that I'm already working on, is that there's a lot of really cool tie-ins. You know, I think if you're liking the EMBARK series, you're really gonna like what's going to be coming out, because these smaller stories I'm going to be able to get out faster, and they all are going to interconnect. And I'm really excited about what's being created here. So, again, The Vanishing War, tentative release date of April 24th. And then the first side spinoff story, the first EMBARK adventure story, is tentatively scheduled to be released on or around July 10th. I'm looking at a summer release for that. And I should be able to get all 3 audiobook, ebook, paperback, all out at the same time. And then we get into book 5 and the start of the new series. That I don't think I'll have out by the end of the year. It most likely will be out the beginning of next year. It depends on how quickly I'm able to work. But I am trying to shorten this whole process with my book writing. So thank you so much for listening to this as well. Like I said, I do the podcast because of how much I love these particular things in my life, my Star Wars and my Depeche Mode. I make a little bit of money off of them based off of YouTube and what I get off of Spreaker, but not a ton. And they are a way to help promote my attempts to be an author. So as always, if you want to support the show and you haven't purchased any of these books yet, now is the time. Again, Amazon.com, look for EMBARK, Jon Justice. You'll see the first 2 books available right now. And if you've already purchased them, head on over to the website anyways and buy them for a friend. You can gift them to a friend right now. The ebooks are just $2.99. So for $3, if you know somebody who's a science fiction fan and a reader, just say, hey, here's this book series that this guy does a podcast. Check it out. And I was thinking about you. So one more little thing. I haven't done it in a while, but for those that are completely unfamiliar with my EMBARK series, here's a little ad that I threw together a while back, and then I'll be back on the other side to wrap up this week's listener feedback, My Nerd World Star Wars show. For Earth, the end is near. Only a reluctant hero and the girl he loves have the power to save humanity's future. It's the not-so-distant future, and car culture is replaced by air and space flight, made possible by 2 of Earth's largest corporations. Flight mechanic Taft Guardia spends his free time racing through the skies with his 3 best friends and the girl he longs to be with, headstrong Keitha Morrow. With the planet on the brink of an industrial apocalypse, a powerful and ruthless corporate madman, Sint Argum, moves to exploit the disaster with his covertly created military. When Taft, Keitha, and their friends uncover a shocking secret, Sint Argum will stop at nothing to find them. Time on Earth is running out, but with the help of a ragtag group of young pilots, they'll fight for humanity's future and survival among the stars.
My Nerd World.
And I'll mention, too, one more time before we wrap the show up, that the second edition of EMBARK Book 1 is now available. The second edition is shorter by about 3,500 words, and I've moved a lot of the exposition out, added a prologue, and really sped up the first half of the book. So if you gave the book a try and thought the beginning of it was too bogged down, hopefully this maybe will, inspire you to go and check it out again, because I really did streamline the beginning of the book. I will say, though, just as a case of point of the first edition, Severin was reading the first edition, and she was actually really enjoying a lot of the exposition. But when it comes to first time authors, it's well known. I guess I found out afterwards that a lot of times first time authors such as myself end up in a position where they do a lot of exposition on a first book. That isn't necessary, because you're just kind of getting your footing and establishing the universe. So, and that was certainly the case with EMBARK. I like a lot of it, but it was one of the biggest complaints that I had, if not the complaint that I had about the book, is that it was front-loaded with a lot of exposition. So I moved to correct that with the second edition. So if you want to give it another shot, go and check it out. And if you're trying it for the first time, then lucky you. You get the faster, more intense version. So, all right, that's it. Keep an eye on your podcasting feeds. Another show will be out, the main show this weekend. Got lots to cover, more excerpts from the novelization. We got a Cassian Andor start series date, a few more thoughts when it comes to the High Republic, and just waiting for the release of The Rise of Skywalker on March 17th. So thank you so much for checking out the show. As always, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or you can drop a comment up on YouTube, and I'll include you on next week's listener feedback. And head on over to Amazon.com right now and pick up your preferred copy of the science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. I'll talk to you guys again real soon, and thank you, as always, so much for listening to the show this week. I really do appreciate it.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.